Welcome home, sir.
It's so good to be back. Thanks for having me.
So talk to me about how life has been. I understand you're just celebrating an anniversary. You've got a new baby girl, so that makes a daughter and son now. You know, on the outside looking in, seems like things are going pretty well.
I can't complain, man. I'm so incredibly blessed. My wife and I, 4 years of marriage on December 9th. Our baby girl, Nehemiah, was born August 30th. So now we have 2 kids under 2. Which is a little bit crazy, but so much joy and love. And with the book and other career opportunities and the basic income stuff's exploding nationwide and other things, it's just been no complaints, really happy.
You mentioned the book, The Deeper Roots, right? The Deeper the Roots. And when you look at this book and the timing of it all, why'd you want to do it now?
Well, what's interesting is that when I won election in 2016, it was the same night Trump won election. So afterwards, all these folks were emailing me saying, we would love to publish your book. Like, what is it like? Like, how did you become mayor at 26, considering where you came from? And also, what does it say about America on the same night you're elected that Donald Trump is elected? And do you have any commentary on that? So I thought that was a really interesting frame about how America is a great place with problems. Like Stockton, a great place with problems, right? And how a place can elect a Michael Tubbs and a Donald Trump and on the same night. And what does that say about progress, but also the work that has to be done? So I said, sure, let's think about it. And then I was the mayor. So it was hard for me to even get into the mental space to write. But then my son was born. And as my son was born, I was thinking about childcare costs because mayor is a public service job. You don't make a lot of money as mayor of the city of Stockton. And I just knew we needed money for childcare. So I said, well, actually, if I write this book, we'll have a little bit of something to pay for childcare for the next couple of years. And then in writing it, I thought I learned so much about my own parents, about myself, and it was great to make sense of what was happening, because this was in 2020. So COVID was happening, home all the time, stress, people scared, people anxious. And it was like in that space, I was able to gain some clarity about sort of the work we were doing, sort of my roots, where I come from. And then so I finished actually in October of 2020, before the re-election loss.
The book?
Yeah, the book was done in October 2020, and then the re-election loss happened, so then I had to go back and write in November and December about, okay, you said all these great things, but you lost. Like, what does that mean for you? What does that say about Stockton? What does that say about the work you committed yourself to? So it was actually therapeutic in that way as well, to spend the last 2 months of last year just thinking and processing it and figuring out what's next.
And with that hindsight now, if you will, would you say that you're mad or glad the way things have turned out?
I am very glad. And I say that because I spent my entire 20s as an elected official, which no other person my age in this country can say they've done, right?
26 years old?
26-year-old mayor. Like, no one in the history of this country has been that young to be mayor of a city this large, and particularly at the time in which we were doing it with Black Lives Matter, COVID-19, Donald Trump as president, all this angst. So I'm glad for that experience, and I'm glad to be doing other things now. I'm glad to be working with mayors nationwide. I'm glad to be working with the White House. I'm glad to be working with the governor. I'm glad to be working with the private sector. I'm glad to be focused on storytelling. I'm glad to spend time with my family. So and losing never feels good, but I talk about this in the book. I realized I learned so much more when things don't go my way, when things are unexpected. And I think it's in those times you learn some of the best lessons that get you ready for the next sort of mountaintop experience. So very glad.
So talk to me then about what you've learned about that loss and what people will find in this book.
Yeah, well, the biggest learning for me was that purpose and position aren't the same, and that oftentimes your position is a means to an end to your purpose. And purpose doesn't change, but your position might, your title might. And it was a forcing function for me, because I was like, I'm no longer mayor of Stockton. Do I still care about ending poverty? Do I care about opportunity for all people? Do I care about making sure government works for everyone, right? And can I do that without being mayor? And the answer is a resounding yes. I think in many respects I'm doing more and having a bigger impact at a much greater scale. And then number two, I also learned that, progress comes at a price. So that if you're gonna lead, if you're gonna be bold, if you're gonna try to make things different, you should expect conflict. And I think in retrospect, I feel like kind of naive in that my first election I won with 62% of the vote. My second election I won with 72% of the vote. So I think I was naive in thinking that all this change was happening, but it wasn't going to cost something, or it wasn't going to create any conflict. So I wish I would have spent more time thinking about, okay, who's upset that we're giving kids scholarships? And I thought about, like, these are just crazy people, or that's dumb. Who would be upset about that? Or who's upset that we're doing guaranteed income? But I was so dismissive of, like, why would anyone be upset at progress without understanding that politics is a blood sport. It's about resources. It's about power. It's about who owns what, who dictates what. And there's some people, particularly in this region, that are used to having power, that are used to controlling resources, that are used to setting priorities. And those weren't the people I met with. Those weren't the people I, frankly, spent a lot of time thinking about how to make them richer, how to make them feel more important. And I recognize that in politics, I should spend a little more time thinking about that. And the third thing I learned was that I still love the city. Like, I'm still so happy for all the work we did. I still feel very honored that I was given the opportunity to lead so young. And I think for whatever's next, the roots here, the lessons here will be foundational to that.
And so in the book, you really do go over the good, the bad, and the ugly, don't you? I mean, it's almost like you really do take an opportunity to really take a deep dive and talk about why you wanted to do that. That ain't easy.
Yeah, well, I spent so much of my childhood reading, and reading memoirs, reading autobiographies, reading stories of people. And I think I learned the most from stories that weren't sanitized, that were real, that were messy like life is. And I knew, being so young, I said, if I have anything to say, at least it needs to be honest and true. And I really wanted it to be a timestamp. So 40 years from now, I can look back, like, look what this crazy 28-year-old thinking when he wrote this. And then, like, well, that was so real and raw, but also for my children, because a lot of this is about life before they got here, and who mom was, who dad was before they got here. And I wanted to be real and authentic to that. And also, as I mentioned earlier, just sort of just very unique experiences, and wanting to be honest about that. And I know when I was first writing it, I told my publisher, I said, well, listen, this is not going to be a political memoir. It's not going to be one of those, like, nice American dream type. It's going to be real and honest to my story. I remember telling my team, I said, no one's going to read this draft but me. You guys aren't going to tell me that don't say this, don't say that. I don't want it sanitized in that way. I want it to be real and authentic, and we'll see, we'll let the chips fall where they may, but it has to be real to me, and it has to be real to my voice. And really proud of what we created and that we did that.
You know, something that really resonated with me, and I think it will with a lot of people, especially those of us who grew up in single-parent households, is you talking about the three mothers, you know, the mom, the grandmama, and the auntie, you know, and how it was those folks who raised you and the love that they brought to the table.
Yeah, I think so much of my story before was told from, like, this deficit lens, like this poor single mother raised this young man, his father's in jail. So in the book, I wanted to make sure we talked about how difficult that was, but also how these three women were extraordinary and had a real gift for seeing what could be a burden about what's been, and that they had unrealistic, but big expectations for me, my cousin, my brother.
Why do you say unrealistic?
I think my mom in particular, like, she's a perfectionist, so she's wanted perfection. She wanted, like, everything needs to be the best at everything, right? But I think that sort of unbridled belief, in that despite our income, despite the circumstances of your birth, we expect you to do something and be something, and not just expect it, but we're going to do everything we can to support you, to drive you, to take off work, to argue with your teachers, to make sure you feel supported. I recognize now that was such a gift, and that's something that you don't hear when you think of single parents, or you don't hear when you hear about absent fathers. But in my case, I've been blessed to have sort of my mom, my aunt, and my grandmother really give up their lives to make sure I had a great life, to make sure my cousins had a great life, to make sure my brother had a great life. And I wanted to make sure I spoke about that in the book. That's something you don't hear when people talk about single parents.
Well, and then the other thing you talk about is this notion of exceptionalism, and this idea that you've got to be exceptional to be successful. And while you were able to do it, you were able to get the scholarship and go to the good schools and do these things, you were saying that ought not be the litmus test for being successful.
Yeah, I think it's completely ridiculous, because we expect exceptionalism for only certain people. I have a lot of friends who are very wealthy, because their parents are wealthy, or who are very wealthy because they met somebody at a cocktail party that liked them. And I wouldn't say they're great people. I wouldn't say they're exceptional. I wouldn't say they're top of class. And I don't think we have that expectation of exceptionalism for anyone but folks born with less. And that just seems so ridiculous to me. And I think oftentimes we talk about exceptionalism, it makes us all take our hands off of actual structural problems. Like, it's easy to say, well, Michael Tubbs went to Stanford. It's harder to say, why were there more cops on his school campus than counselors? Right? Like, that's a harder conversation because it's not just about one person pulling himself up by their bootstraps. So it's about how we as a society allow so many people not to have boots and not to have straps. And what I went to do in the book, and when I was mayor and now even after, is really just force us to have those conversations. Like, no, it's great. I'm so blessed to have the opportunities I've had. I worked incredibly hard for them, but I think it's unrealistic to expect somebody to save their lunch money to buy SAT prep books because maybe the preparation in their high school wasn't that great. Or to spend hours on the internet finding guidance counselors because maybe they didn't have sort of the support from in terms of counselors who knew about elite colleges. Or you have to meet Valerie Jarrett to get, like, there's so many things in my life have been so great, but also very, very unique and particular. And I don't think it's wise to say you need to do all these things to be successful. And that there's people who work incredibly hard who don't make a lot of money. There's people who are working themselves nearly to death, particularly in this pandemic. And we're saying, well, you have less because you're not exceptional. It's just crazy because, and I hate to pick on the man, but our last president, very wealthy guy. What's exceptional about him? He was born wealthy. Is that what we call exceptionalism? So I think we have to be very true about what we expect from people, and I think we should expect the same things from all people, not, hey, you need to be exceptional to even get to college. And you just need to be born to the right people, and you'll be fine.
Well, and you can tell the way you talk about it, you're very passionate about this. You know, and that means something, and that's why we'll get to, and so what you want to do about it here shortly. But we also talked in the book about how you kind of get into some of the ugly and some of the bad. And so let's go back to that and talk about how here you were celebrating, what was it?
So much. It was, we had the Financial Center Credit Union.
Yeah, the credit union
opening on Airport Way. You understand how excited I was for that because, I mean, my council district, South Stockton, was incredibly unbanked. There wasn't a bank within a 4 or 5 mile radius. No new bank in 50 plus years, but 50, 60,000 people. And it was like, it felt like such a concrete win in the show of like, oh wow, we can invest in this place and in these people. So through the moon about that. Then through the moon because the first documentary that was made when I was on city council called True Sun, not only premiered at Tribeca, it was running in festivals in like LA and New York. I mean, in theaters. So you go to like,
you were excited.
Yeah, you go to like the cinema and it's like True Sun. And I was like, this is amazing. I'm 24 years old. So it was at a moment of too much elation and too much high, and that made very terrible choices.
So you had a few things to drink, you got on the roads, and you end up being pulled over by police. And you said there you were fulfilling a dreadful prophecy.
Yeah, so much of my life, not just childhood, so much of my life up to that moment was also driven by a sense of foreboding that, oh wow, your father's incarcerated. What does that say about you? And I think a lot of that gave me the drive to be so focused and to work incredibly hard and to try to do everything right. And just she's like, that's never gonna be me, that's never gonna be me, that's never gonna be me. So when I was arrested for my DUI, it was terrifying, number one, because like, oh my gosh, like I'm a council member. Like everything I worked hard for could be done for this one stupid decision I shouldn't have made. And then number two, it was like, well, maybe you're not that much different from your father. Maybe we're all one bad decision away from having a whole different story and narrative be told about us. And I think what I learned from that is maybe we're also more than the worst decision we've made. And I think that has to come with like actual real remorse though. Like I was actually sorry. Like I actually didn't make any excuses. I didn't give any context. I know I made a decision to drive when I should not have driven. I'm so terribly sorry. I went to DUI classes with everyone else with a hoodie on so people wouldn't recognize me. But it was in DUI. Paid my fines like everyone else. And then I went to schools, starting with the school I taught at. And I had to look those young people in the eyes and talk about how I know we say make all the right decisions. I know we say this, but I'm here to talk to you about what happens when you don't. What happens when you make a stupid decision? And how do you respond from that, right? And I think I should have never done it, but I'm grateful for what I've learned from it because it really gave me more compassion for people. Because you don't really understand the need for grace or second chances until you need grace or a second chance. Like you say as a platitude, like, oh yeah, you forgive people, give people second chance. I don't need that though. I do everything right the first time. So when you actually need a second chance and you get one, you're so grateful. And I remember sort of seeing the ways in which many folks in the community, without me asking for anything, doing anything, really rallying around and standing up. And that just taught me an important lesson of like, you don't want to throw people away. And oftentimes people who know they messed up, if you give them a second chance, they're gonna work twice as hard because they also know they messed up. And I think that's part of why even now that I'm not mayor, I have such deep love for this city because in that moment, the community really rallied around and said, young man, don't step down, step up. And that's sort of one of the biggest things I've learned, one of the biggest
Wow,
learning
that's a
experiences
good
I've
one.
had.
Don't step down, step up.
Yeah, I write about this in the book, The Deeper the Roots. Ms. Bivens, my NAACP youth advisor when I was in high school, who still is the NAACP youth advisor today, she got up to the podium during city council meeting, public comment, and she said, Councilman Tubbs, let me be very clear. This is not the time for you to step down. We don't want you to step down. We need you to step up. If you need help, let's get help, but step up and continue to lead because there's a good work that's begun that has to continue.
And that was before you even became mayor.
I was on city council. I was 24, I was on city council for 2 years, 24-year-old city council member, and just seeing how at a moment where it would have been justified to say, oh, we tried this, he's too young, he's not ready, come back in a little bit. The community was like, no. We're upset that this happened, but there's such deep love for you, and let's figure out how to use this for all of us to learn. And I've never forgot that moment.
So then talk to me about this dichotomy. So you have a community that embraces you at that low point. And then you get mayor, you do all of these things where you talk about scholarships and you try and talk about a basic income and you're doing it in your hometown.
19% reduction in crime, 40% reduction in homicide.
Yeah, and then the community said, nah, we're gonna go a different direction. You know what I mean? How do you balance that?
Cities are messy, complex, and nuanced like people are. And what was different from when I was mayor, when I was on city council, was a couple things. Number one, there was disinformation stuff. Like there was always some weird rumor about me on the internet from like this weird fake anti-police corruption page, which actually wasn't that. It was just a bunch of angry people who were using that sort of wedge issue to create a following. They were anti-police corruption, but only posting about me. I'm not a cop. I'm the reform-driven council member who's pushing all the reforms. It was weird. So, but when I was mayor, it became funded. There was some ad revenue attached to it. There was a strategy around it. There was, one of the gentlemen who started one of the fake news sites talked about how he used the psych ops training he received in the military to come up with like how to target people on social media. And I think that was a difference because what they did wasn't incredibly novel. It's this idea that when you're the first of anything, that means that not that you're special, but that there's some real institutional bias. That Stockton's been around since 1849, and to have the first black mayor in 2016 suggests that there's some anti-blackness in the community. Either that or that black people aren't qualified for 200 years to be mayor. I think it's the former, right? I think they really preyed on that. And I mean, things were moving, but progress in government comes slow, particularly when you're inheriting a mess, particularly when you're inheriting a city that was literally most miserable, most violent, the worst on everything. So I think they really preyed on that, and that was kind of the differential. And I also think that, and you see it with all the autopsy and the reports that came out, that for some people who are used to being in the limelight or who are used to being sort of consulted or who are used to being leaders or seen as such, there was some jealousy, right? You have this young black kid, beautiful wife, beautiful family, all this national attention, folks from Vice President Harris to Governor Newsom to Michael Bloomberg to
Oprah, Barack Obama.
But those folks coming to Stockton to sit with him and seek his counsel and think about how they should think about the nation. I think for a lot of people, it's like, well, wait, this. And I mean, when has that ever happened in Stockton? Like, when has anyone outside, most people in Stockton don't even care about who their elected officials are, much less outside of Stockton. So to have all that attention in such a short amount of time on this young black kid with a father in jail from the South Side who's not talking about pull your pants up, who's not talking about work hard and you'll be all right, but who's talking about, no, we got to fix structures. Let's talk about racism. Let's end white supremacy. I think all of that was just a lot for people.
Too much, you say.
And then you have homeless, and then you have all these real problems that take solutions. And in that sort of environment, sort of disinformation took hold. And I say that because if you talk to people, these trolls still bother me. I don't live in Stockton. I'm not the mayor of Stockton. I have nothing to do with Stockton politics. I still get tagged and post, like I'm still the boogeyman. Like Michael Tubbs this, Michael Tubbs that. Michael Tubbs is in LA living his best life on the beach.
Well, talk to me about that. So you're in SoCal now. Was that purposeful? Did you decide, okay, it's just time for me for a change of scenery?
Yeah, I think sort of, and I talk about this in the book, I love my city, but the abuse I underwent as an elected official, like the being called by staff, being scared to check voicemails because they would hear the N-word multiple times, being called a thug and a monkey, being told a crook, having people come to my house, having my car broken into but nothing stolen the day after the election. Like all this, like people wishing SIDS on my kids and all people harassing my wife at her yoga studio. Like all those things was worth it when I was in office. But once I wasn't elected, I said, you know what, I did what I could do. I did a lot. And I'm still the chair of the Reinvent Stockton Foundation board. We just extended the scholarship to all students, so still in that work. But it was absolutely a time for a change of scenery and time to go. So we thought we were going to DC. So I actually accepted the job in DC, but in the White House. But then so many opportunities were available here in California. Working with the governor, doing things in entertainment.
Now wait a minute, you're making news now. So you're saying you accepted a job with the Biden administration in the White House and then decided, no thank you.
It's not exactly like that, but I had accepted the job. I had went through the process. We're finalizing kind of start date. But then, in that time, in terms of when was the best place to start, we got found out we were pregnant. Or my wife was pregnant. Governor was calling me like, hey, you should really think about staying in California. We could do some great things here. And there was so much opportunity that was different than just government. And also I recognize that I have such deep love for Stockton, but also for California. Like I went to school in California, et cetera, that, and California is the 5th largest economy in the world. It's the largest state. It's like, well, it's gonna be hard to change the nation, particularly with all the division. But in California, we could do something. So,
because you've got what? Majority control?
Because we have a Democratic governor, Democratic state senate, Democratic assembly, but we also have like some enlightened Republicans. Like some of my biggest supporters in Stockton were Republican folks. I'm like, this is something special could be done here in California. And then my wife, she's an author, she's a public intellectual. We're both very interested in storytelling and media and narrative. And we were like, well, what if we didn't just jump right back to government 100%? What if God is allowing us this time to explore other passions and do other things? So we decided in February or March that actually we're not going to go to DC. We'll stay in California, do the work with the governor, do the work with basic income, do other things. And then we decided to go to SoCal because we know NorCal. We know Sacramento. We know the Bay Area, went to school there. We don't know LA that well. And I'm still a NorCal guy, but I get why people like Southern California as well. My son loves the beach. The mayor, my Congress member, my mayor, my council member, my assembly member, my state senator, all the elected officials aren't just people I agree with, they're like actual close friends. And in Stockton, oftentimes I was fighting with some of my fellow elected officials about mask ordinances, about whether we should help people get vaccinated, about whether we should give kids scholarships. So like even just the conversations I get to have now are so different. Everything's not a fight. So I'm really enjoying it.
You started a national trend with the Universal Basic Income, the pilot program, more than 100 families receiving, $500 a month. no strings attached. It was privately funded, right? Donations and things of that nature. And now, this year, California became the first state in the nation to fund a universal basic income pilot program. So what's the ultimate goal here in California?
The ultimate goal in California is to leverage our size, leverage our heft to get the federal government to take note, because any guaranteed income policy has to be a federal policy. And that's why through the 60 mayors I'm working with in Mayors for Guaranteed Income, an organization I started when I was mayor to organize mayors to do similar work. And that's why the work with the governor around supporting these pilots at the state level are all making the case to the feds. Like, look, we're doing what we can as local cities. We're doing what we can as counties and as states. But we really need the federal government to take note, to step up and to support. And we know that sort of given Governor Newsom's profile and the way he leads on a variety of issues, that when Governor Newsom, does something, people pay attention. People listen, people perk up. And I just applaud his leadership in saying, you know what, Tubbs? And that's part of the reason why I decided to stay in California. Because he was like, listen, we could do some really big things for this country around economic mobility if you stay in California. And true to his word, he's delivered and has delivered. So it's been great sort of working with him and his team as well. And we're excited about what California is doing. But the idea is to get this to be a federal policy. And California will continue to lead the way in experimentation and innovation and research and telling the story, so the federal government will catch up, and they usually catch up after a couple of years.
Well, I was going to say, do you have a timeline for that? And then also, has the pandemic kind of sped that up, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, the timeline for me, for most things, is always yesterday, right? I think that's why some people get mad. I'm like, no, we should have been doing this. That's why we have to move a little bit quicker. But we have a child tax credit now at the federal level, which is essentially what we were doing in Stockton. Giving money, $300 a month per kid, to families with children, no strings attached. And what's funny is that that's from our taxpayer dollars, less vitriol than I got for using someone else's money to do it in Stockton, right? It's so wild how that worked out. But that's a policy now. It's in the Build Back Better Act. Hopefully the Senate passes it as is, and then we could build on extending it. So I think my timeline for that is in the next 6 years to just have the child tax credit be a permanent part of our safety net. And then from there, that's a lot of people getting guaranteed income. So I might pass the baton to someone else, and someone else could run it and extend it to more people, but really focus on the next 6 years and at the least, making that child tax credit permanent.
Let's look at what you're doing next, because it seems like you've always got something coming up. I don't know when you rest, but in this case, you're looking at doing something epic. And you're talking about ending poverty in California. Epic, a name of the new program that you're launching. What, next year?
Yeah. So I'm obsessed, and I've been obsessed with ending poverty. And part of it I talk about in the book. It's from lived experience. Poverty is not sexy, it's not cute, it's not fun. It may build character, but I think you can build character without being in poverty as well. I know a lot of people who weren't born in poverty who have character, right? So it serves no purpose. It's expensive. We spend so much money. We complain about it. You log into Nextdoor or Facebook. That's all everyone's complaining about. It's also very pervasive. Most people are actually one paycheck away from poverty. Like it's something that we can solve. It's within our grasp to solve it. It's not an easy fix. It's going to take political will. It's going to take setting a priority. It's going to take saying we can end this. It's going to say we actually want to end this. And it's also a moral conversation, because I would argue, and people could disagree, but I think some people are loath to admit it, but there's something that feels good about being in a better position vis-a-vis someone else. That yes, it's tough, but I'm not like this person. Yes, it's tough, but I got this. And we have to get rid of all that and understand that we all do better when we all do better. In California, it's embarrassing, frankly, for us to be sort of this golden state, this progressive state, yet people can't afford to live here. Like the grocers, the essential workers can't find the essential need of housing that they can afford in most of our cities. That's unacceptable. Or that we lead the nation in poverty, above some of our friends in Alabama, Mississippi, West Virginia. Like, what? That is completely unacceptable. So for the next several years, Me and a small team will be working on sort of just elevating the issue and putting forth policy solutions. Like if we really want to end poverty in California, this is what we have to do.
Well, you know that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
So are you talking about tangible things? Because that seems big.
I'm very pragmatic and practical, so definitely tangible things. And then the question will be, maybe it's an issue of political will, and that's a different question. But first, I want to make sure people understand that this is a problem we can solve, that there are solutions that we can implement that solves this problem. And then if we don't implement the solutions, that's a different conversation. But I think right now it's so big. It's particularly when you look at sort of housing affordability and homelessness as the most abject example of the pervasive level of poverty in the state, that people feel it's unsolvable. So first is to show like, no, it can be solved. And the second step, and this work you all do, is on narrative and storytelling, and making sure people understand that folks aren't poor just because they make poor choices, or folks aren't poor just because they're lazy. Like, actually, those are lies. That folks are poor because our economy is structured in a way that pays people poverty wages, that pays people wages that doesn't keep up with the cost of living or the cost of where they live, that folks are poor because of structural issues, because of legacies of redlining and wealth theft and institutionalized racism. That there's a lot of reasons why people are poor, but most of them are actually policy decisions, right? That's the first piece. And the second piece. And then the third piece is saying, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Here's what we can do.
What are some examples?
So we have, I can't bury the lead, so we have a report coming out in January to formally launch, but I mean, a guaranteed income is a solution. There's things like baby bonds that would help end the racial wealth gap in the state. There's things, but also help everybody. There's things like job guarantees. There's a variety of right to shelter. There's a variety of things that'll be on the docket, and then it'll be job guarantees. Yeah. So there's been a lot of discussion about sort of, because we work, and sort of the fact that wages are so low, it's because there's no real competition. So if federal government, state government, some government steps in and says, okay, we have a set of jobs in these different sectors, and we're going to pay what we pay, that creates competition. So then folks will have to say, well, we have a lot of hiring power, a lot of procurement power, a lot of economic power. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, right? So that's part of it as well. And all these things haven't been vetted by my friend, the governor. So this is Michael Tubbs talking as Michael Tubbs, the guy who wants to end poverty.
But this is what you want to do as part of your new, because this is is it a nonprofit? Is it going to be
It's like an initiative. So it's housed with a fiscal sponsor. It has some staff, but the idea is to sort of work not just with the governor, but with cities, with counties, with community groups, and say, do we want to do it or not? Like, I want to do it. This is how we can do it. Are you guys in or not? And if we're not in, that's going to be a different conversation with a different strategy about how do we get people in.
And are you giving yourself a time frame to end poverty in California?
I think I'm going to give myself a decade just to see how much progress can be made. And I have a lot of life to live, though. But then if we haven't reduced poverty in any meaningful way, then it's time to look at tactics, strategies, or do something else. And maybe it's something that can't be done. But I know it can be done, and I know it's the issue of political will. So I'm excited about getting on everyone's nerves and calling the question: do we want to end poverty? Yes or no?
So we look at the book, your memoir of hope and home, The Deeper the Roots. When you put this out there into the universe, how are you feeling?
I don't cook, but I feel like how people must feel when they make a good meal and spend hours slaving and weeks thinking about recipes, and then it's out, and you're waiting like, do you like it? Do you like it? What do you think? No, should I do this? Oh, do you like this? Like, I feel so proud to have created something. The reviews and stuff have been great, but I've really enjoyed with like people I grew up with. Like when my mom, who was mortified, said, it's actually a good book. I think people are going to like it.
She was mortified?
Oh yeah, she was like, oh my gosh.
What is he going to say, Lord?
Yeah, what's he going to say? Like, oh, why? Who cares? Or when sort of people I've worked with or people in the book are like, I'm crying, I'm touched, oh my gosh. And that feels really good. And what I appreciate about it is that it bridges sort of two literary worlds I really enjoy and enjoyed, particularly when I was younger. Like the world of coming of age memoirs, things like Man Child of the Promised Land or Makes Me Wanna Holla, or Buck, which we use as a book club book, or the other Westmore, stories like that, but also stories like political memoirs of politicians and the choices they made in the politics. And I think sort of there's not anything that combines both in a really real authentic way, because oftentimes when you write a political memoir, you're like 50 years old and you're thinking about running for president.
Well, you kind of read my mind. I'm like, okay, so you wrote a memoir. And what is this setting the stage for?
No,
you getting ready to run for politics again?
That's the beauty of it. It's setting the stage to write the memoir, right? Like, it's just a story. and this is what I think about the world. This is how I think we could do better. And this is, if there's anything to learn from my life thus far, here it is. And I think that's the real beauty of it. Like, it's not, it's funny because I wrote this thinking I was going to be reelected. I wrote it in October of last year. And I'm kind of thankful now, because imagine if I was reelected and we're having this conversation, it would be, are you ready for Senate? It would be like, what's next? It would be so much pressure. But now there's no pressure. What's next is trying to end poverty in California, trying to raise my family, trying to continue to grow as a person. And if there's another office that makes sense in the future, evaluate it. And if it makes sense, run. If it doesn't, don't. But there's no like, this book is for this. No, this book is for consumptions, for folks to read, to learn, to agree, to disagree, to be challenged, to be inspired, to be moved, to be angry, and to do something about it.
We are here at the Maya Angelou Library in Stockton. I understand you spent a lot of time here growing up, scholarship applications, things of that nature. As we start to wrap things up, how is it for you, this kind of full circle moment, to be sitting here now at this moment?
It feels weird in that so much of the success happened when I was still in Stockton. So I was still here. I was still hosting weekly meetings here. I was still hosting book club here. So it feels more full circle that I've been away for a couple months. So I haven't been here, that I haven't been in the mix. And now I come back, I'm like, oh my, like, it's weird the way the memories flood, not just from childhood, but from sort of my previous job and the job previous to that. So it feels really good because, and I wanted to do the interview here on purpose because I think if you had told people even 10 years ago or 20 years ago that the next mayor of Stockton would be here because it's 5 minutes away from his house and he would be doing his college applications here, people would look at you like you were crazy. If you had said the person who's going to start a basic income movement across this country is locked out of his house, so he's here making a college list, like that makes no sense. If you had said sort of a kid who's reading a book here is going to have a book published by Oprah, no one would believe you. And I think that's the point of the book, and that's really the point of my work, this idea that talent and intellect are universal. Like those, like resource and opportunities are not, but there are brilliant kids who go to the Maya Angelou Library, just like there's brilliant kids who go to the Stanford Library. There's brilliant kids who go to Hamilton Middle School across the street where I went. Just like there's brilliant kids who go to Brookside Christian School, which is where I went for elementary school. Like the idea that we shouldn't be surprised that there's good things that come from places like South Stockton is also one of the points I want to drive home in the book.
Well, then I'll just give you the final word. I mean, you've got the deeper the roots. It's out in the universe now. You are raising your beautiful family down in SoCal. What's next?
What's next is we're going to end poverty in California. We're going to continue doing the work around guaranteed income across this country. Probably do a little more things in the storytelling, narrative space, documentaries, maybe TV shows, et cetera. And just continue to focus on how do we just create a literally my only goal, like people always say he has an agenda. I do. So turn up the TV. My agenda is this. I just want the country to be true to what it says on paper. I really want to live in a country that has opportunity for everyone. I want to live in a country where outcomes have to be equal, but they have to be fair. They have to be just, right? Like I want to live in a country that's worthy of my 2 kids, and I'll do everything in my power to make it be so.